for attending. Let's begin by calling the roll. Sarah, if you would say your name and the organization that you are that you represent on the committee.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Grimwood, and I'm the NRC appointee.
Thank you very much. Burton.
Burton Flint Planning Board.
Thomas.
Tom Kearns, Select Board appointee.
Thank you. John Kratzley. Hi, John, we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
John Kratzley, a Select Board appointee.
Thank you very much. And Nancy back there, I don't know if she's going to be able to speak up.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission.
Okay, Nancy is going to be in and out tonight. I think mostly listening, but is not going to be able to be as present in terms of a visual presence. That is a quorum, and I so declare. We want to begin by reviewing of any current applications and any new materials that we have received. And to my knowledge, having looked at the website, we do not have any new materials except a letter which we all received today in relationship to the Assabet River project. Is that correct, Heather?
There was one thing that I did send. I did forward you the supplemental information from the White Pond. I sent you an email letting you know that supplemental information had been submitted and it was added to the website. And then letters of support and public comment letters on projects have also been added to the website since the last meeting.
They've been pouring in, and I hope you've all had a chance to go to our website and see the number of letters that have appeared. And because they're important and they represent the feelings of our community. And so it is a very good and wise thing for us to try to be attentive to those as we talk about each of these projects. Let me review for just a minute what we're going to do in terms of the evaluation criterion for each of the applications for funding. John? John's iPad, I don't know who John is, but John, if you have, not you, John Kratzley, but someone else, there is a question being asked. John? Your hand is raised. Do we know who you are? Okay, I'm not hearing from him, so I will proceed. Okay. This is an opportunity for us to review the materials and to see where we stand and how many more meetings we think we're going to need in order to thoroughly review each of the projects and to see if we need additional information in order to proceed. So this will take us some time. We have received a treasurer's report, as it were, and we know that at the present moment, we have on hand now I have $2,061,722. And that appears to be the final figure for the amount of money we have to allocate. By contrast, we have $2,580,000 in applications, which means we're going to be about more than $500,000 shy. So we're going to have some very serious conversations to have about how we proceed given the petitions that we've received and the amount of money we have at hand. Hello, Charles. Could you introduce yourself and just tell us with what your authority in terms of attending, please? Charles, we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Charles Phillips, appointed by the Housing Authority.
Thank you so much. And Peter, is that our Peter behind the Peter orange screen? I don't know, but I'm not hearing anything. Okay. So it will be a general discussion, and we will try to figure out whether there are some projects which we know just right away we're going to fully fund, either by tradition or by the nature of the application. Then we'll go on to discuss each of the projects one by one to see what we need, what we need to know, whether we need what kind of further discussion we feel we need to undertake. And then based on that discussion, look ahead to see, oh, there's Peter. I thought so. Hi, Peter. Welcome. Could you introduce yourself, please, and tell us your authority? We can't hear you.
Peter Ward, Select Board appointee, sorry.
Thank you. No, glad to have you. Okay. So the only person I believe we're missing is Paul right now. And then I just want to review, even though this is not in the, I'm rushing through the agenda for a minute because I want to go to something for people who are new, which is the voting process. We eventually will vote, but by and large, our purpose, as I've experienced it on this remarkable committee, is to try to come to a consensus. Of course, a majority would carry a vote, but where we can, it is wiser, I think, and prudent for us to try to arrive at a consensus in which we all have a mutual agreement about how we should proceed. Can I hear any discussion about that for a moment? Even though that's the fourth item on the agenda, I'd like to get that out in the open right now. Any discussions or any commentary that might either differ with that statement or enhance that statement? Okay, let's begin. Heather, are you going to screen share the list of projects for us to go through?
Could I just offer one comment to follow up what you were just talking about?
Absolutely, Peter, of course.
Yeah, one of the things we've sort of processes we've used in the past that's proved pretty helpful is to not feel that we have to come to consensus, through the first iteration.
Oh, yeah.
And as I recall, one of the things we've done is we've sort of come up with creative ways of classifying the various projects, maybe some that are, obviously look like there's consensus around them, maybe some projects where we might need more detail in terms of questions or letters of support or guidance. And then some cases, projects that we're sort of not sure about. And that way we sort of move these around as Heather puts that spreadsheet model together and sort of move towards the consensus that you were just talking about.
Exactly, Peter. And that will emerge as we discuss each project, I think. Thank you for that, that thoughtful addition. Tom?
Yeah, thanks. Just adding to Peter's comments there. I think that at a certain point in our process, we'll get some additional input, maybe from town manager and select board. I know we've received town council review, which is very, very helpful, but I think some discussion about those inputs and and maybe Heather has some insight as to the potential timing of that. I know we have yet to get through a public hearing, and there's some steps in front of us, but there's some additional inputs that do provide us some guidance.
Absolutely. And so for anybody who's joining this this committee for the first time or listening, please know that there is ample opportunity for contributions from the community and discussion as we go forward. There is a formal public hearing that will take place on the 30th of November. And that will give you yet again another opportunity to contribute. And as we eventually finalize our recommendations and produce a warrant, there's also the opportunity, of course, at the town meeting to again speak up and express whatever feelings you have in relationship to whatever recommendations the CPC provides. So please know that your voices will be heard and will be respected. So Heather, could you put that, one of the awkward things about not being together and being virtual makes us not being able to look at a screen while looking at each other. But if you could put that screen up, it would be fantastic.
Which screen would you like? The worksheet list of projects?
Yeah, and their financial requests. Okay. Now, what we have tended to do is to go along and first of all, part of the responsibility of the CPC is to balance 4 areas: housing, open space, historic preservation, and recreation. And so in the process of our deliberations, we try to keep track of that. Usually at the very end, we sit down and say, okay, what have we done? And have we provided money for each of those areas? But you can see that Heather has very nicely broken those out right now for us. So Heather, let's start with the very first one. The Town of Concord Regional Housing Service Offices. The request is for $28,000. In the public hearing, you can also see that there's an additional $28,000 coming from other sources. This is one we have traditionally supported. Do I hear any conversation about this one or any commentary? And if you could raise your hand mechanically, it will push you to the top of a screen so that I know on whom to call. Burton and then John.
Diane, I would just say, to move things along, that this is one I think we've always funded. We've gotten a great return on, and I would put this into the bucket of the column of most likely will be funded, and we don't need additional information on. That's my view.
Thank you, Burton. John? We can't hear you, John. Maybe the committee could all unmute right now so that we can quickly talk back and forth. Go ahead, John.
I agree with Burton. Historically, we've always funded this.
Okay. So do I hear any need for further conversation about that from the committee? For the public hearing, there will be ample opportunity to discuss this. We'll ask for public commentary at the end of our discussion. Concord Home for the Aged. Again, we're not looking at $150,000. We're not trying to decide that. The question really is, do we have the information we need? Do we feel that this is a project that we, about which we have serious questions or a sense of general support? Can I hear commentary from the committee, please? Peter, would you like to start us?
The one observation I had on this project was, have we yet seen a letter of support from the Historic District Commission?
We have not. I did not see one on the, did anybody see that on the website? I kept my website up. Just a minute.
I don't think the HDC hasn't historically submitted letters of support. If a project requires HDC approval, sometimes you guys have requested that the applicant submit for that. But the HDC doesn't generally draft letters of support. I can ask them to do so if you are interested in that.
What is your sensibility, Peter?
The only thing that caught my attention was the categories historic preservation. So I'm not saying it's necessary, but I was just curious as to whether that was something that might be forthcoming.
The Historical Commission has in the past historically, so that could be something that may come from them.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Peter. Burton, and then Tom.
Only a comment to say, I've often wondered whether this should also be considered in the category of affordable housing, because it provides an alternative, very affordable, certainly compared to the other more traditional assisted living facilities in town, housing option. And so I'm wondering if this could be something that could be in 2 buckets.
I think that's prudent and wise. Heather, can we do that? Can we just automatically do that ourselves? Or do we have to?
I don't know, because they did not apply for community housing.
Okay. Well, mentally, we can think of it.
Yeah, well, and then I would just make the general comment that this is a group that I think they originally came to us with a very modest request, and we said we want to see something more comprehensive. It's a really valuable building to be, to preserve in the community, and they've subsequently come back with a series of stages and have shown a really good process of managing this in stages and managing the funds we've given to them. with a lot of contribution, especially in time and effort on their part. And so it's a project that I think is really noteworthy.
Thank you very much. Tom?
I'm going to simply just support what Burton just said. So yes, and I just wonder, Heather, in the past, has historic preservation written on this project, since this is their maybe fourth time around? Don't know if they've done that in the past.
The Historical Commission, I will check past files.
Yeah, maybe it's there. Yeah, but anyway, thank you.
Are there any other comments from the committee? Okay, hearing none, this looks like a project that we would like to support and hope that we can fund fully. Is that the general feeling of the group?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hearing no disagreement, let's go forward. Okay. The next project is the Trustees of Preservation in the Old Manse. Now, we've received a comment by our by the legal people saying that the exterior painting. So would anybody like to summarize? Burton, as a lawyer, would you like to summarize for us? What?
I haven't read the letter for a few weeks, but as I recall, it was along the lines of, we can fix holes in the wood, but we can't scrape and repaint.
Yes, and repaint.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because that should be just a routine maintenance operation.
I'd like,
Okay, Nancy.
I'd like to say that painting is a first line order of defense for maintaining any structure. I think that the application referred to this as an aesthetic benefit, but I don't think we should lose track of the importance of paint in protecting what's there. So it's not just aesthetic at all. And after you do all these other things, I think repainting is probably necessary. And the last time it was painted, I don't remember exactly, but quite a long time ago, and not really that.
I think it was
20
11 years, was it?
2010.
Yeah, 11 years. That's not the best routine maintenance schedule for a building.
And Nancy, I didn't mean to imply that painting was not an essential part of protecting the building, but as I think from prior conversations, that there's this line that gets drawn in this Community Preservation Act around maintenance versus preservation. And it seems in prior discussions that things like painting, the things that that save you from having to do capital intensive repairs,
Right.
Unfortunately fall outside the scope of the act.
Well, I'm not sure, and I will check again with the historical folks at the Old Manse, but I think that in this case, it's not just plain routine maintenance, but
Great.
agree to disagree.
Well, and I don't mean to.
Our lawyer that is saying this, Nancy. So we.
No.
Not you, Burton. I mean Krieger.
Krieger, right? Anderson and Krieger.
Says that this falls perhaps outside of the CPA aegis. Go ahead.
What I would put this for the time being in the bucket of, we need a little bit more information. Is there a way that this is that these repairs, including painting, are properly characterized as historical preservation? And that very well may be the case.
Yeah, that's fair.
That seems a perfect resolution. Thank you very much. The next one is the Wright Tavern. And they're asking for $260,000, which is I think precisely the same amount we gave them last year at this time. May I hear a conversation and commentary on this project, please?
I'm gonna have to talk.
Nancy?
Nobody else? I was dismayed to see the draft preservation restriction that was submitted, which clearly is not in line with the conditions that were set forth in the conditions in the agreement for the last allocation of funds. I was also very confused and disturbed by the description of what was going to be done with the first $260,000 compared with what was being proposed for the second request now before us. And it seems to me that there was very significant misunderstanding of what the last grant was all about. And at this point, I cannot understand how we can support this second request.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Are there other comments from the committee on this?
Diane, only to ask some questions maybe of Nancy in terms of, I think you've highlighted there were some disconnects, but could you provide a little more information on your concern about the preservation restriction and the way that the first grant was spent?
The conditions for the first grant of funding required the Wright Tavern folks to consult with the Historical Commission in the preparation of a preservation restriction that would cover both the interior and the exterior of the Wright Tavern to protect the public investment. And the draft that was submitted only speaks specifically to the exterior preservation, which is pretty well protected by the HDC, and all of our conversations focused on the protection of the interior as changes were being made and repairs were being made.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Do I hear any other comment on this one from anybody on the committee?
Yes, I had a question, two questions on this. One is in terms of letters of support, I'm not sure that I had seen any of those, at least on the website, and was wondering if those might be coming forward. That's my first question. The second question is, were the funds from last year spent in entirety? Or
No,
are they some of those still outstanding?
I can answer that one, Peter. They have not yet been.
Okay.
And from everything I can discern, it would be quite a while before they would be spent in their entirety. As you remember last year, the petition was one of the things emphasized by the petitioners was that the structure itself was fragile and vulnerable, and that therefore much interior maintenance needed to take place. To my knowledge, that interior maintenance has yet to take place. Now, we urged that there be a very serious study of how that structure can be reinforced without the destruction of anything that is original in that structure. But so far, that money has not been expended, Peter. We may learn more as we go forward, but that's my understanding. Does anybody feel that they have a different understanding than that? Okay, Tom?
Well, I guess I do echo Nancy's comments that I'm confused by the plan for last year's funding and how that rolls into this request. I do appreciate that they submitted the timeline, which I'm looking at right now.
That's right.
Which I think helps, moves in the right direction. But it's kind of unclear as to exactly what the plan is from my point of view, and that it follows the pretty tightly crafted framework that we approved last year.
Well, the proposal that they've presented now, the timeline, is a reflection of that money, isn't it? And how that might be spent. Peter, your hand is still up. Do you have another comment that you'd like to add?
No, I think I was thinking what Tom's questions pretty much addressed that.
Okay.
So I guess the question is, it sounds like there's still a lot to do with last year's funding in the near future. So it sounds like there's a pretty full schedule in terms of timelines. Right.
So I think we put this project in the vulnerable, whether we're going to be able to fund it, whether we can fund it this year, and certainly a project where we're going to need a great deal more information. John?
Yeah, I, of course, had recused myself last year
Right.
because my wife was involved in preparing the application, but she was in no way involved this particular year. But it does strike me that if we can't figure out how to vote on this year's application, shouldn't we be asking for, and if folks are not satisfied with the document, and I notice it's undated, but I know it came in, it does say it's responsive to the questioning that took place on the 5th of October.
It was sent October 6th as an email.
Oh, okay. All right. I printed it. I just didn't see the date. But if we can't figure out whether to fund any of next year's grant because we're not comfortable about what's going on this year, shouldn't we have some greater clarification moving forward? Some process to learn what is actually happening, what is consistent with the grant, what's not.
I think you're spot on, John. Tom?
I agree, John. I think last year's process included several or a handful of additional information sessions with this applicant to try to help them, make a successful application. I think we all, did kind of went, pretty deeply into the beginning of the next year of this early this year to try to help with that. And I think given the schedule for town meeting and all that, there was the time to do that. I don't know if we have that same time frame this year. I'm not sure about that, but there was time in the last cycle to have some kind of additional work sessions that seemed to kind of get at some greater level of clarity.
I just want to apologize for my tardiness. I was kind of tied up, but sorry to interrupt.
Can you interrupt? Can you introduce yourself, please, and explain what agency brings you here?
Yes, this is Paul Bohm, representative from the Recreation Commission.
Thank you.
Apologies to all.
No, that's wonderful. We're just glad to have you. John, is your hand is still up? Do you
Well,
have?
it just strikes me that if I were the applicant and I get turned down for next year because we don't understand what you're doing this year, wouldn't they have wanted a chance to make another explanation? If you're not, if this document isn't good enough to make people comfortable about at least understanding how this year's money is being spent, and they get turned down because they didn't think this was good enough, wouldn't they then say, well, why didn't you give me a chance?
Well, I think they probably would. Heather, can you clarify for us what our protocol is under this kind of circumstance?
So I'm taking notes on like every kind of outstanding question you have about projects. And I'll go through the list at the end of the meeting. But I'll reach out to the applicants tomorrow via email and let them know any questions or concerns that came up at tonight's meeting to allow them to provide a response for the next meeting.
That's what I thought the protocol was. Peter?
And I was also going to ask, have we heard from, would it be HTC that we would hear from in terms of support for this project as well?
No, again, the HDC generally does not draft letters of support. It could be the Historical Commission.
Okay.
Somebody's radio is on in the background, and if they could mute themselves, that would be terrific, I think. Thank you very much. John, does that satisfy what you've mentioned?
Well, only if they have enough commentary, only if Heather has enough commentary to help them with people's problems. I gather one of the problems is the preservation restriction. And a second problem is I gathered some inconsistency between the work in this 2-page document and what was actually funded. And that's causing people to be hesitant about the second year.
Right. Well, I think that it's the understanding, of course, whenever we give money, is it not, and please correct me if this is wrong, that people will be forthcoming, use that money in the way in which they, requested, for which they, this is not a good sentence. I'm going to start that sentence again. We presume that they will use the money that we funded in an appropriate and timely way. And what we're seeing by and large is a kind of repetition in the second application of some of the very things we funded last time. And so I think that the confusion, I believe I'm accurately summarizing the confusion that Nancy and Tom reflect. Tom and Nancy, is that correct?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, hon. Yes. And
Yeah.
Tom-
I
Tom-
was most disappointed by the lack of collaboration with the Historical Commission on the preservation restriction, because I think we could have helped them avoid this problem of going completely off track with what was intended.
Okay.
That's all. That's all.
Paul, did you have a comment you would make?
I was just, I'm sorry, I was just questioning which project we're talking about here, because I had a comment.
Tavern. Paul, we're working
Okay.
we're working our way down through the various projects, and we're not making any determination in any final way right now. But
Right.
we're reflecting where we still need to get more information or clarity, and where we think that this is kind of all set, and we have a sense for the nature of the project and how we might proceed. Okay.
Okay, can I just, I'm sorry to backtrack a little bit. Can I just ask a very quick question about B?
About B. Well, if you'll stay on after the, I mean, we agreed that it looked like a promising project and one that we would be eager to try to support.
On the Home for the Aged?
Yes.
But I do have a question. Can I just put the question out this way?
Okay, Paul.
The question was on funding and financing. I know I'm new to the committee. We funded this project before, but given the assets of the Home for the Aged and the income, I'm just wondering how much of their income and assets are being dedicated to the project. It's an entity that has significant assets and significant income from the assets. So it's just a question on the financing and why they need this exact amount of funding.
Of course, they're contributing 1/4 of the funding themselves.
I understand that, but I think they have assets to contribute more.
Okay, well, it's a good question to ask, Paul.
Thank you for indulging me on that. Thanks.
No, thank you very much. John, your hand is up. Do you still have a commentary?
Well, I guess if Heather's making a list, I would be asking in this document of the 6th of October, how many items do they feel are consistent with the grant that was voted to them? And how many do they think are different? And then that might help us know whether the new grant is worth moving forward on or not.
Worth supporting. Does
Well,
that
is
make
it-
sense? Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it reasonable to actually ask them to put dollar amounts against what's been completed so that we can understand that better? Or is that just asking for too much?
Well, I think that's very reasonable.
I thought they said $78 had been expended.
But they haven't expended a great deal right now. They had
Okay.
not. And when their petition or application was presented, they had not spent a great deal of money at that point. Their timeline would suggest that they're spending a great deal more as they go forward, but it's unfortunately it's not very clear how much of that has been expended. So I guess what we're looking for, Heather, if I can summarize John and others, Nancy, accurately, what we really need is a more detailed accounting of how this particular application differs from the application that we received last year in terms of funding and needs.
Okay. A lot of that's in their application.
Well, it is and it isn't, Nancy, because a lot of what they say is repetitious. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Well, right. seems like potentially that between last year and this, they've gone through a fair amount of reorganization or kind of restructuring their own process, which is probably very good, excellent to do. But in doing so, maybe there's different folks carrying the lantern, or and I think we probably need to make sure the people that are pulling the project forward are able to address this. And I think, John, to your earlier point, I think we're willing and available to spend the time, reasonable time, to both understand and help them, to produce something that can be as as successful as it can possibly be.
Understanding that, of course, they cannot dramatically adjust the application.
Yes.
Because that's not part of, unfortunately or fortunately, the rules of the CPC Act.
Well, they did make an adjustment last year in terms of, I think, tailoring it to something quite specific. So I think that's allowable.
Absolutely. In fact, they shrunk the funds.
Yeah, it seemed
and focused.
Rather unfocused, and there were some kind of program things that they had yet to do, and I thought they did a nice job responding and getting focused, and that was encouraging.
Absolutely. And John, your hand is still up.
Well, I know Tom in the October 5th, which I listened to last night, indeed, the whole thing, he mentioned that there was a budget that came out of that reevaluation shrinking process. So it would seem to me that budget, they ought to be able to tie that budget to the various things that are on this new 2-page document. And that might help us figure out whether they are going forward this year consistent with the grant. And that might help us evaluate whether what they want to do in the next year is different or the same or worth supporting at all.
Thank you. I think that's a very accurate summary of where we are. So Heather, I would suggest that we are treading water on this one and that a great deal more information needs to be forthcoming before we can be clear in our deliberations and determination. The Concord Free Public Library grant is next. And this is the Bose application for oral histories. We've received a very nice letter of support from Melissa Sawfield, which you may have seen in the letters of support. It's explaining why this is such an important project for our town. We did not receive from Anka a delineation of the way in which the town has already supported this endeavor. And so it is blank on the amount of other funding sources, but we know there have been many. Can we proceed on this particular request, modest though it is, without that information, or do we need to ask Anka to produce that just for our own edification? Any commentary on that? Well, yes, Charles.
I think that given the importance of this these historic recordings and the relatively small amount of money that they're asking for, that we can let them off the hook in terms of dealing with their own support.
Okay, Peter.
Yeah, and I also recall during the presentation, one or more of us asked questions relative to the need for contingencies, and it really seemed as if they'd thought through the budget and felt that they had taken that into consideration, including having already thought through the requirements for phase 3, which was the development of the web platform. So I guess I didn't sense that there was a need to further explore the opportunity for additional funding. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's sort of what I recall.
Well, I feel very comfortable, but I wanted to make certain that we all were, Peter. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else? Is there any other comment? Thank you very much. So hearing none, my sense is, oh, wait, Tom.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just, my very brief comment is I was also pleased that town council just gave us opinion on eligibility for this one. Yeah, and was positive in that regard. So I thought that was very helpful.
Thank you, Tom. So thank you for that comment. Hearing any other concern, this looks like a project, Heather, that we would say we would like to support, probably in full. Okay. All right, the next project, which is the Assabet River Bluff Preservation Housing and Land Acquisition Project. I'm going to make a couple of comments before we begin this discussion. There have been, I think, 8 letters or 9 letters presented in support, but not of this project. And one of the reasons is because there was a general feeling that the information is insufficient in terms of how this land is going to be used in the future. And I would like to suggest to the group a variety of concerns. First of all, what is the land's value apart from the $2.8 million? Has there been an independent evaluation of, if this land were on the marketplace, how much would it cost? The second thing is, and we have plenty of support from the neighborhood to keep this as a land preservation for open space, and even some limited public housing. But given the presentation that we received from the town, it was very unclear how much housing might go in there, how much of it would be affordable, how much of it wouldn't, where the driveways would come in and out, on what intersection on the streets would come in and out. And I feel like we have to turn back to the town on this one before we even dive into a detailed discussion, to try to get a more specific understanding of what those expectations are. Now, I would love to hear commentary on that statement, please. Okay, Peter, and then Paul, and then Charles, and then Burton.
Diane, related to what you were just saying, and building on that, I also read through the letters of support and also concern. It seems to me as if there are some safety concerns on that intersection that were expressed in a clear and consistent manner. And I guess I would be interested in hearing how those might be addressed.
Thank you, Peter. Paul?
Yeah, I think there were safety concerns in the letters. There was the housing intensity concern that you articulated, which it was ambiguous in the application. The third one was community involvement.
Yes.
In that, and I don't know how to characterize it. Ambiguity is certainly that. So I think those are the 3 issues surrounding this this application, and they probably could all be clarified, I think, with supplemental information.
Thank you, Paul. Charles?
My impression, I think, from Marcia was that, in fact, the $2.8 million was an appraised value.
Okay.
And that would be, as a result, the value that the town would be willing to pay for it.
Okay. I did,
even though it's a little under what the person's asking. And my other point is that this is really, I also like the idea that, and I don't know how the committee feels about this, but that this is a bank, this is land banking.
right.
And we don't know really how, we won't know. And one of the problems is we won't really know how much of the area is suitable for housing until we own the property and actually do some clearer investigations.
Mhm.
So in the meantime, the idea, I kind of like that idea, and I don't know if the committee does, to put it together, buy the property, and we will work out later how much housing goes in there and how it will be laid out.
Thank you, Charles. Burton, and then Sarah.
Thank you. So first on the value, I think, yeah, Charles is correct that there was an appraised value, and I can just tell you, we're seeing there's the potential for a 6-house subdivision in there, and so people are, I can tell you, in West Concord, tear downs are being bought for 600,000 roughly and being replaced. So land acquisition value per lot right now in West Concord is somewhere in the $500,000 to $1 million a lot. So it's easily supported, I think, that value in terms of it was sold in a private sale. In terms of all these various issues with respect to the town providing enough information, the balance between housing and conservation, safety issues, community involvement. A couple of things I'd want to emphasize as we think about these issues is, first of all, these land acquisitions by the town are oftentimes necessarily done in a hurried manner. There's no right of first refusal on this land. This is a willing seller who is offered to engage with the town over a period of time. And it's through a process where certain stakeholders in the community have reached out directly to the landowner. In this case, I think the Concord Land Trust and the Sudbury Valley trustees initiating that conversation. So there has not been a widespread community discussion. And I think that will come in due course, but due to the nature of how these transactions go, it can be hard to get all the information you'd like for the ultimate disposition of the property down the road. I think things like how many houses and the safety issues in terms of the access, I do think that those things, there will be a lot of opportunities to look at that, but it would be nice to, in broad brushstrokes, to the extent we can through funding conditions, maybe start reflecting what the community is looking for here. I think we have received even the letter of concern, I think, is a letter in support of the acquisition. And I think that really what we're getting is that people weighing in on what's the appropriate mix of conservation land versus housing. I think, those safety issues would be present, but to a greater degree if the town's not able to get this property and it went to a private developer. The private developer would have the right to build a street, a subdivision road out to Upland Road. So those safety issues would be there. And I think we should think of that as the worst case scenario with respect to safety and with respect to what type of housing might go in there. Anyway, those are my general thoughts. And I am strongly in support of this. One thing that hasn't really been spoken to that I've heard is that this is a keystone property between the trail and what could be a continuous trail that goes around the Assabet River throughout West Concord, which over the past couple of decades has been slowly getting pieced together, including through prior acquisitions that the town did to get grants within the last 6 or 7 years, on some property near Marshall Farm. And this is a really keystone property for that, establishing that trail. And so I'm in strong favor of this project, but I would like to establish sort of the bones of the mix between conservation and affordable housing at this point.
Thank you, Burton, very much. Sarah?
So just a couple of comments. That Burton made this comment, but I just wanted to say that I took notes that the price was based on the standard for 6 plots. So I think that was how, I agree, that's how it came about. But I did want to ask a question about the, Bert, you said that if a private property developer bought the land, then they would be able to definitely put a road into Upland. Is that, would they have to get permission from anybody, or is that a definite given? Because I was going to ask if it would be possible before the town put in committed to buying the land, whether we could really understand what the options were there as far as access.
My understanding, so yes, they would need to get an approval coming through the planning board in the first instance. If there's a couple of different models of development. I would highlight 3 for our discussion. One would be a traditional subdivision. There's actually remarkably little say in what the town can do in terms of putting restrictions on that. It's a subdivision control law is one that's essentially designed to clear hurdles for developers to build subdivisions. There is a 50-foot wide access road, and I believe Marcia said that would meet the requirements for a subdivision road accessing the property. And if, assuming that is correct, then I would say there's a very, very high likelihood that somebody could build a subdivision. It would go through the planning board approval process, but we've seen much more challenging properties that we have had to provide subdivision approval for. Another alternative of development could be a planned residential development in which the town has significantly more say in how that gets developed. And you can get much more creative, but it would be a cluster of housing, but perhaps the access could be, there could be more flexibility in terms of providing access off of Old Marlborough, perhaps. The last would be, hanging over this, as folks on the committee, I think generally are aware, is this requirement around a 10% affordable housing in the town, or else you can have what's called a hostile 40B development. That could be another thing that could go in there if we slip below our numbers. And with the delays that are going on right now for the Junction Village affordable housing development, it's not out of the question that we could find ourselves not meeting that 10% threshold for a period of time. So that could also be going in there. But the short answer to your question is, I do think that Marcia established that a subdivision could go in there.
Could go in. Okay, thank you.
And
You
thank
don't what?
This is such a good discussion.
I'm muted the whole time except for when I just pipe up.
Nancy, thank you. Good. I wanted to say the reason I ask about the costs, just for clarification, is that I've been listening to a lot of people in town and their discussions about this project, and some have felt that maybe this land was worth a great deal more than what we're being asked to spend, and that this might be considered, therefore, a kind of bargain on the part of the town, and therefore prove particularly advantageous for the town to grab it while we can. And that was the reason for my question. Charles.
I don't, oh, sorry.
Yeah, your hand. Okay. So on reflection, okay, yes, Peter.
I guess I want to reinforce something that Burton said, that these opportunities don't come up very often, and I just think we want to take that into account. We may have some outstanding questions, but I would encourage us to think about this in the short term, and just making sure that this is an opportunity that does not pass us by.
Absolutely. I see somebody, Tom Kearns.
Well, I think it may represent half of this request, half of our available funding. I know we're not exactly there yet, but if in fact we were supporting it, but we're not able to fully support it, I think that might be something that the applicant could respond to. I mean, would they be able to develop a pivot plan and still be able to move forward?
I believe we asked that question when Marcia was with us, Tom, but it's a good one. I see the hand of John on an iPad, but I don't know who the John is. And if you could hold your question, unless it's absolutely urgent, until the end of our deliberations on the various projects, I would be appreciative. Who is ever behind that, John, if you could speak up and let us know what if that's all right with you. Okay, I'm not hearing a response. Okay.
That might be Charles.
I don't believe so. I can see
No,
Charles.
but whoever it is muted.
Yes.
There.
He's not muted. Sorry,
So-
I'm not muted now. I just
Yes.
wanted to raise a question of recusal. I noticed that one of the earlier members spoke about having recused himself. And I guess my question really is, who's entitled to vote on this particular project? Because it seems like a lot of the committee is either part of the proponent or an appointee of the proponent or the applicants. Maybe that's because I can't quite understand all the nuances at this point, but I'd just like to raise that issue as to who is entitled to vote in making this recommendation.
Well, thank you, John, for your question. And I will try to answer that and then turn to people wiser than I on the committee.
Diane,
Nancy?
very briefly, I support this project wholeheartedly and for all the reasons that Burton stated. That's it.
Thank you. I would like to say that I think that we have been duly appointed by the select board or by various other committees in town, each of which represents recreation, the planning board, and the NRC and others to pay, and historic commission to pay careful attention to these applications. I don't believe that there is a predisposition on the committee among its membership to support or not support this application. All of the applications are considered part of our town and part of the way our town grows and prospers. And I think that each of us has been given the not only the opportunity, but the privilege of making that decision, John.
Diane, if I may,
And
it would be great so that we have accurate minutes if John could say his name and address for the record. And also just to add to your point, I think that we recuse ourselves when we would receive a direct personal benefit or we are the applicant applying for funds. We are appointees of committees. This is a town-funded project, but that is the exact framework under which most of the CPC funding is awarded. Is that many of them are town projects that we as members of various appointments of town committees review, and there's no conflict of interest in doing that. We're effectively the mini legislative body considering these items. And I think if anybody does have a personal conflict of interest or would directly benefits, for example, if one of us was a trustee of the trust holding this property, or we were the real estate agent that was transacting in the property, or we were, and perhaps if we were an immediate abutter, that would represent a conflict. I don't think that's present for any members of this board.
thank you. John, could you identify yourself, please? And your
Yeah, I
address?
didn't mean to obscure that because I wanted to make sure that you had received our notice of objection
Yes, we
to the
did.
proposal.
We-
I had to send it to several people on the fly tonight. My name is John Richardson. I'm a resident of South Meadow Ridge and a member of the Board of Trustees of South Meadow Ridge Condominium. And we did indicate our opposition to the project tonight. I'm not sure that I agree with the conclusion that you just gave about conflicts of interest, but I think it's a point that we need to consider going down the road. I'm not sure whether this is an administrative proceeding or a legislative proceeding. That probably makes a big difference. But in the end, I really just don't understand how an application could be filed that said the neighborhood was in support when I don't think you can establish that the neighborhood is in support unless you take a very broad view of the neighborhood.
Diane, point of order. Is this a deliberation open to the public right now, or are we invite public comments later?
I asked for the public comments to come later, but John's hand when you were not here was raised right in the very beginning of our meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And so I wanted to honor that. I find myself a little frustrated sometimes when committees plow forward and sometimes ignore the public. And I wanted to make certain that we were not behaving in that way. John, we would all be happy to discuss this with you. I think that there is no personal interest in any of our parts. And I thank you for your comment. And then I would ask you please to step off the platform right now and let our committee proceed. But we appreciate your comment very much. And clarification about this kind of thing is always important. Sarah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make probably an obvious point that I think this is a wonderful piece of open space, and my sense is from many of the comments from the public is that they are very supportive of obtaining the land, particularly for the open space point of view. And I think a lot of the frustration that we've heard is from a misunderstanding about what the land will be used for. So I just want to put that on the record that this is certainly a wonderful piece of land for many reasons.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. Therefore, in summary, I believe I can say that we would like to learn a little bit more about how the land is going to be specifically used to the degree that the town can help us to see that. And how we then help the town to gather information from the community about community responses will be important going forward. So this one still needs some clarification. Does that seem a fair summary to the members of the committee? Okay.
May I just, sorry, Dan, just one comment. I mean, obviously there's a lot of questions, but what I heard, particularly from Bert, is that we're not going to be able to receive all these answers, you know, before we have to make a decision. So,
Well, Sarah, I think that's the nub of what we have to keep.
Right, okay.
We're gonna need time to do that because.
Okay.
Diane,
2 seconds, Nancy, just a second.
certainly.
Hear from the community in their letters, in their meetings, in their discussions, that they're that the group that has communicated with us, Mr. Richards' letter, I have not yet seen, and I presume we will find it somewhere. But the community, what the community seems to be saying is we're very much, and it, you know, besides Mr. Richards and perhaps some others, in favor of going forward with this as a preserved plot of land. Right. What we don't want to do is open it up to 6 major houses being built in there, with all the complexity of traffic and even if it includes a couple of affordable houses. And so I think that helping to clarify that, helping to understand that to the degree that we can, is a very important thing going forward.
Agreed, thank you.
I think otherwise it's unresponsive to community concerns. Yes, Paul?
Can the committee ultimately provide a conditional approval in the voting? We've been talking, sounds like various stipulations, you know, that answers need to come forward at some point. When we haven't discussed the voting process, but it sounds like on this one, we're all in favor of it if certain things occur.
Well, Paul, you weren't here yet, so you didn't hear the voting process, but go ahead. We discussed it out of order earlier on.
Well, I don't know if you discussed this matter, whether a conditional approval is with certain stipulations, which seems to be surrounding this one, if that's permitted.
I would have to turn to Heather, or people who know more about this than I. I've read everything that I can, but I don't know that we can provide limitations in terms of how land is used in the future. A land bank is, of course, what so many people are speaking to so positively. Heather, do you have anything you can add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look into it more. I don't think a conditional approval would be appropriate.
I actually went and read before this meeting for this very reason, everything I could find, and I didn't see anything, but I see lots of hands. So Tom, and then John, and then Peter.
Thanks, Diane. Well, in my notes, it's that the $1 million was potentially comprised of 500 for open space and 500 for housing. I know those are the 2 X's, open space and community housing, and that there was, you know, at least conceptually, some sense of that kind of a split. That's why I brought up the issue of the number earlier, in terms of through our deliberations, as we start to really dig into this one, it might be interesting to kind of understand if that is exactly the right balance.
Thank you very much, Burton.
Well, and I guess the question as to what it means to be a conditional approval. We certainly do put conditions on our grants, and what I'm thinking of is the precedent for when we acquired the Warner's Pond property. There was a little bit of a failure of some of this discussion around what should happen with respect to affordable housing early on. Affordable housing wasn't engaged, but the town nonetheless, through sort of the deliberation immediately preceding town meeting and at town meeting, committed to building an affordable unit there. And I would say that was a condition that's saying we're going forward with the funding, but it's everybody's understanding and expectation that an affordable unit will be developed on this property. I think to the same degree, if our concern is the balance of affordable housing versus conservation, I think Tom touched on a great thing. How much are we allocating percentage-wise? Though, of course, there are other funding sources which may be primarily affordable housing or primarily open space conservation that could impact that. But also, I think setting the expectation in our funding that based upon the community input that was in support of the funding, that we believe a certain number of houses would be an appropriate limit. That's what I would see as a condition, so to speak.
Okay, Peter, and then Tom.
Yeah, and this may be splitting hairs, but
I'm sorry, I just have to say, Nancy, I'm sorry. You, the hand function didn't come up and I've skipped you. We'll come right back to you after Peter.
Okay, thank you. I can't find it.
I'm so sorry. Okay.
I can't find it.
well, should we let Nancy go right now?
Okay, that's a lovely idea. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, it's very short. I thought perhaps 3 pots of money could be considered, including recreation, which might be a useful division. And then I just think it's an incredible opportunity, but the 3 pots of money might be an interesting way to address this. That's it. Thank you, Peter and everybody.
Thank you. Peter, now, thank you.
So this may be splitting hairs, but we will not be approving the funding. Our role here is to make a series of recommendations, which will then go forward to town meeting. And we still have, what, 2 more meetings following this in terms of our deliberations. So we're going to continue to seek clarification, which is going to be hopefully address many of the questions that have been raised during this discussion.
Thank you, Peter. And we may need more than just 2 going forward. We may need several more before we're ready for our final deliberations. So, Burton, your hand is still up. So if you've got a comment, I'd love to hear it. We all love to hear it. And then Tom. Oops, it's down. Tom.
Thanks. Well, I think one of the questions before us will be, if in fact we imagine that the $1 million request is granted 50% open space and 50% community housing kind of on that basis. And then in fact, the land acquisition happens and community housing doesn't happen, for whatever reason, it never becomes part of it. Then what position is that grant money in? So I just think maybe at some point as we go forward, maybe working through that a little bit. I don't think it actually splits it out in the application itself. I think it was in the presentation. So it may actually create more constraints for them than they intended.
Well, in the actual application itself, I don't find 50-50. Where did you find that?
No, it was my notes from the presentation.
Notes from the presentation.
Yeah, and so I just think, I think maybe a little clarification. I wouldn't speak on behalf of the applicant, but I think that maybe the presentation created more complexity. Yeah, more complexity than they really want to have.
It did. Thank you, Tom. I know that this deliberation is complicated, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the committee in addressing all of this. The Concord Housing Development Corporation is, I think, next. Junction Village Open Space Task Force. Do you all see that one here? $300,000 is being requested, $25,000 for other funds, and this is considered for phase 1 of this project. Questions have been asked in the community about this particular project, and I just want to say that what we have learned from listening to the presenters is that taking advantage of the equipment while the Junction Village project is underway, taking advantage of the existing equipment would save money. And so there does seem to be a certain urgency to get about this project. So can we hear commentary on this project, please?
Diane, just to expand on that point you just raised, the urgency is around actually a commitment that the developer has made to contribute $25,000 in in-kind services, I believe as a condition of a prior CPC grant of funding that was part of. I may be mistaken because there was a separate.
Yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead.
Town grant, but I recall that specifically as being part of the discussion we had at the CPC, and I think that was a condition of one of our grants. That said, they could probably push around $25,000 worth of dirt without additional funding here. But I just wanted to raise that as a point.
Thank you very much, Paul, and then Sarah.
Yeah, so this is really a bit of a down payment on what I think is a very visionary project. Again, open space. There's housing already there adjacent to it by another party. I think this is a very visionary and It's not exactly the same thing as the previous project we talked about, but the question for the committee, this is the first phase of multiple years of funding, I believe. So if you think this project is worthwhile, I think we are about to support it. I would support it going forward. I think it's a very worthwhile project.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
I'm sorry, I'm pressing the wrong buttons.
Okay.
Also like to add in relation to Christopher Heights, there's another link there in that they're planning a conservation restriction for the riverfront, which is part of the Christopher Heights piece, but obviously very relevant to the application as far as we're concerned. And I just like to comment that, you know, when there was a public hearing, there was a lot of questions and concerns, and then it was also raised that a lot of the plans that were put forward at the beginning were not in line with the requirements for the NRC and protecting the riverfront and such like. But the applicants very quickly revised the plan and took that into consideration, and I think came up with a much better plan. So I was just really pleased to see the response to the feedback that they got.
I was too, Sarah. It was in fact impressive.
Yes.
John and then Peter.
Just a larger perspective, it's the next three are all the three biggest dollar items, apart from the land acquisition and apart from the land acquisition and the Wright Tavern. They're all town projects. They're all the same price. And it seems to me one or more of them may be where we have to do some of our trims. So I know we got to think individually, but I can't help myself looking at all three when I think about where I might make some cuts.
Thank you very much.
I think that's a great point, and also where I think we could really receive some input when we say, all right, brass tacks, please rank your priorities, both of the Department of Planning and Land Management and of the Select Board.
And I don't believe we asked them if we were to reduce money on this one. We often ask that question, but in my notes, it doesn't show that we that we asked that question of Marcia at that time. Peter.
Just following up on a point that Sarah made, I think we have yet to hear from the NRC on this project, and would certainly value, you know, their perspective as well, given the proximity here.
I thought
Delia
Delia was at the meeting, wasn't she? When she
Peter, and is my recollection.
I was just thinking of also letters of support as well.
Okay.
There are some letters of support for this, but I didn't see one from Delia. So
all I saw was the West Concord Advisory Committee. Yeah, I didn't see any others.
I think it's been instrumental in helping to focus and refine this whole project. And very grateful for their input. Paul.
I just, what John just talked about, we'll get back to it. I think the trimming issue is something we should discuss after we go through these and iterate, but I do think it's very apropos.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So this looks like a project that we do not need a lot more information about, but that we feel that we can reasonably anticipate that we would cut down some of the funding in order to accommodate other projects as we go forward. Is that a fair summary?
I think it's too early to make that statement.
All right. How do others feel?
That was the perspective I was offering, that we look at the next three as, and then not tonight, but think that each of them might have to take a trim.
That's all I meant, Sarah. So thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. I think it seems a little early. We've got some work to do, figure out what some of the priorities are coming from our town leadership, and also just get a better feel for other town capital budgets, and if there are, you know, other sources that could make up gaps.
Absolutely. That's actually what I meant. So I appreciate the refinement. Let's go to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. We have a letter of support for this one in our packet. Can we hear some commentary on this particular project? Paul, why don't you start, and Burton next?
Yeah, okay. This one's a little bit different. There's a bit of a timeline and urgency, and I think Marsh is in a little bit of a bind here. And there, as I mentioned during the application, there's a $250,000 swing on this, depending whether the state is going to fund some of this fencing. But remember, this is $250,000 for fencing and $50,000 for other rail trail improvements. I personally think there's $50,000 there that could be cut. I'm just saying there's two pieces here. The fencing part of this has to go forward if the trail is going to go forward. And this part of the trail is really important, and there have been commitments to connect the existing trail to Sudbury. So I think the project has to move forward. It's just a question of who funds this and whether there's any wiggle. I think as Bert brought up in the actual fencing specification, but there is fencing needed for safety, and there have been discussions with the abutters, the Stone Root Lane, that preceded this long set of discussions that the Rail Trail Committee had. So I wouldn't say this is all baked, but there's $250,000 that has to be committed by somebody on this for the whole project to proceed.
Thank you very much, Burton.
Yeah, what I would say is, first of all, I really respect the way that town does projects like this in terms of reaching out to abutters and getting support by doing things. I mean, we've seen Marcia come back to us many times for small amounts, for small requests along the Bruce Freeman to fix things where somebody realizes, you know, what I really need, I now that I have all these cyclists near my backyard, I really do need some fencing or some landscaping. And that is really important. And it's, I think, part of why this trail has been recognized and awarded and has been such a success in Concord. That said, Paul, you said that the fencing needs to go forward, and there's a safety issue. The state will fund, if there is a safety issue, the state will fund the fencing, not necessarily the fencing that is being requested here by the application. They will fund I think it was a 48, was it 40, well, middle of my chest high, 3-rail fence, and that's used. There's examples of that fence that was been constructed along other parts of the trail.
Right.
My concern about this is twofold. One, in the context of the other projects we're looking at today, that the majority of this cost is for a fence that is not for safety purposes, but it was described as to keep people from walking and going off the trail and creating trails, you know, on land that we want to be protected. So it's protecting the land. Now, there is absolutely an example of lots of bike trails that were mountain bike trails that were put in on the other side of Powder Mill there that is regrettable. I know a little bit about those trails. That they started on some trust land there, and they were built by an individual. And then children during the pandemic, you did something which I think there's maybe some silver lining too. They got outside and they rode their bikes on those trails in that area. I don't think that this strip of land, though it's relatively wide, is conducive to that kind of activity. And I think that what you will see in terms of people walking on that trail in a way that in that land is really will just be the few connecting trails coming in from that neighborhood. So I'm not sure that there really is a need. I do respect, though, that there's maybe a need for fencing to create a sense of boundary between the trail and the neighborhood. It's my personal belief that that boundary line should then be on the property line between the private property and the town-owned land there, and not immediately adjacent to the trail. But that's not a ditch I'll die in. What I am really concerned about is the proposal to put a 6-foot vertical metal fence between the trail and the view shed of the White Pond. I deeply appreciate that there are real issues with limiting access to the pond, and that we are shortly going to be tested in terms of how well that can be done. I don't think putting in a fence that is going to block the view is maybe the best approach, especially given that immediately adjacent to where this fence will end, which coincides with where the private trust land ends, there are trails that go directly down to the pond. So how does the town manage access to those trails? Lately, they have had, my understanding is they've had not marshals, rangers that patrol the trails during the summertime. And if we're talking about managing access through rangers or protecting the bank from erosion through plantings or other fences that would discourage people from going through, $250,000 buys you a lot of that. I'm not sure that putting up a fence, which to me looks like it's saying this pond is private property, keep out, and that you have to look through is the approach that the town of Concord citizens should be paying for.
Thank you very much, Burton. Sarah and then Paul.
So just a comment, I wrote in my notes, I just wanted to mention that I think there's a timing piece here as well. So I've written down, if it's to be included in the construction of the path, the money for the fencing has to be already in place. So I just want to throw that out. Maybe I misunderstood, or if anyone else wants to comment on that, but I just thought I'd highlight that, because if this is to go forward, it's a matter of, they need to make sure the money will be there for the fence.
That was also my understanding.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that is correct. I think Marcia wants to put this out for contract, and that piece has to be in there, or it's not in there. I don't think it's our role to kind of redesign this project. Marcia, I know, is very thoughtful in doing this and has community input, which has resulted in the fencing that she has proposed there. I think the state would not put in a lot of this fencing. It's considered non-participatory for whatever that reason is, which is why Marcia's gone forward on this. So if we don't put that fencing in, it doesn't get done by anybody. So I just want to defer to Marcia and a judgment on here, because I know this has been very much discussed with the community, discussed within the Rail Trail Committee, and the project has to go forward with some sort of fencing. If she thought that the bushes would be more appropriate, I think she would have put that in there. So
there will be fencing. The state has determined that they will pay for safety fencing, right, as they've done in other areas along the path. What they won't pay for is the higher metal fencing or the fencing between the trail and the adjacent stone root neighborhood where there's not a safety issue.
Right, and that's part of the negotiation. There have been lots of meetings with the community, and to respect the community's wishes, which Marcia has done all along the rail trail in other segments as well, with different fencing. I think this is consistent with how she's handled this trail development with other parts of the trail. That's all I'm saying. So perhaps there are options, but I don't think it's for us to redesign those right now. Is to decide whether this is a worthwhile project or not. And I would support this, but Marcia needs to provide information by, she said, by our voting period, whether the state's going to fund this or not. There's still a possibility the state may fund this. So there's some uncertainty in this as we sit here now.
I think we have some research to do in terms of our aesthetic influence in terms of how something goes forward. Charles?
Yes, Burton, I think that that in fact it is designed to discourage people from going into the White Pond at that point, which has been a real problem for years and years and years. Summertime, night, people coming up the trail, coming off, jumping into the pond, and kind of wrecking that shallow end. Yeah, the pond should be available, but not there for swimming.
Well, I think that's a great point, and Charles, and I'm really aware of that, and I've spent a lot of time standing down there and walking it. What's confusing to me, though, is there's a steep embankment there, which is a challenge to walk down in a small private beach. Shortly down where this fence will end, in the Sudbury direction, is the trails that provide direct access to Sakeham's Cove and other parts there, which is actually where most people go. And this fencing wouldn't protect that. Now, it's in that area that the rail trail bed steers away from the pond slightly, but it is directly connected to those coves through very well-established town trails. So I'm not certain that this fence will, I think it will keep people from walking, certainly keep people from walking down that steep embankment, but it won't keep people from using the pond and swimming in that area because there's like access immediately adjacent to it.
We clearly need more information, and we'll proceed to the third big project, town project for $300,000. The Assabet River pedestrian bridge construction drawings and paintings. Just to summarize on the Bruce Freeman rail trail fencing, I think we still need more discussion. Would everyone agree? Okay. Heather, I think it would be good to ask Marcia to come back and talk with us about all of that, rather than our speculating. I mean, I think it would be nice to know if there are alternative fencing projects. I mean, when I walked along there and saw the possibility of a great tall metal fence obscuring, when you're walking along there, the view of the pond, it was not aesthetically particularly attractive. And it seems to me there are other ways to create impediments to people in any way, ruining that particular declivity. But I think a conversation with Marcia is in order. Does everyone agree?
Yes.
I do. And then, there was $250,000 of fencing, of which 190,000 had nothing to do with that metal fence. The 60,000 is sort of it's the piece we're kicking around here. I don't even know what that fence would look like. So to Burton's issue, it could be the most inappropriate thing. I just think we need Marcia to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think we need clarification.
Yep.
Just to put our souls and minds at rest. The Assabet River pedestrian bridge. Again, lots of conversation in the community about this one. In particular, I found some of the commentary about what role will the business efforts play and the business community play in helping to support this. Right now, there is no other funding source. It's $300,000 for the Assabet River pedestrian bridge construction drawings and permitting. So can we hear commentary from the people on the committee? Charles, and then Burton.
This project, this is the one that I thought would be most likely to postpone in case because of our limited funding. It's a great project, but it's long-term. And that's just my opinion. It's compared with the others that we're seeing here. That's really my comment.
Thank you, Charles, very much. Burton and then Peter.
This is something I'd like a little bit more information on. I agree with Charles. It's a great project. I think there's really strong community support. It solves some real problems of access in West Concord for pedestrians. What I'd like to know is ultimately the construction funding will be an order of magnitude bigger than this. I think it's something in the range of $5 to $6 million or $4 million. So it's big.
$5 to $5 million is what I think.
Right. So have we gotten information about where that comes from? Because here's my thought. If this is one of those things that's eligible for state transportation funding or otherwise, I think one thing we've learned through the way that why Concord's successful in many of these things is they do the legwork to get the design plans done. So they have a shovel-ready project. So when there's something like a $1.2 trillion transportation bill that showers money from Washington on Massachusetts, that we're ready for these projects to go forward. We've seen through the 5-year transportation improvement plans that you go through these incremental processes of your 25% design, your 50% design, and you need to have it all lined up with that 100% design to go and get the real funding, the construction funding. What I'm wondering is this actually, while we're paying $300,000 now, or could we actually get a multiple out of this of $4 million in state funding? And do we see that in the near future? Would Marcia be taking this to the regional tip that we're part of? If not, I agree with Charles that this is something that it's a long-term project. It's going to stay out there. We've already invested some money in it. And I'm sure we will in the future, and we'll then need to find the right time for it.
Thank you very much. I think Peter was next and then Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, as I recall, there is some matching funding, and this was from the Mass Trails grant. And as I recall during the presentation, the likelihood of that grant was very high. I think the threshold was 25% match from the town, which, depending on however much we recommended, would still clear that hurdle. So, but the grant was, as I recall, $410,000.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
Actually, I wrote down that the grant is $300,000 and it only requires a 20% match. The other $110,000 was from private donations.
That's what I thought as well.
Yeah. And I just wanted to follow up on Bert's comments. I did note that the plan is with this funding, if we were to give it, was to get shovel ready so that they were, ready if, even though the tip application in theory was four years out, but they would be ready to be kind of slip in with a smaller project if there was suddenly the funding there. So as you said, this could actually put us in a really strong position if we were to get it to that point.
Thank you. Burton, your hand is still up. Do you have something to add? No, okay. Do I hear other comments from members of the committee? So this project, in summary, is one that we think is exciting. We think it's something that we hope will eventually happen, but may not need to happen right now, given the limits of funding that we have. Is that about right? Do I hear? Okay. All right. Now from the White Pond Advisory Committee. The recreation facility strategic plan, no, restore White Pond, mine is in a different order. Okay. The White Pond Shore Drive pedestrian access. Can we hear commentary on this one, please? I'd like to just note that we have yet to receive a letter of support from Delia Kay, and I kept looking for one over the course of this week. I kept going back and circling back and wondering if we were going to receive one, but to my knowledge, we have yet to receive it. It may be in the cloud someplace, but I have not seen it on our website. Paul.
Yeah, so, on face value, this project looks very worthwhile. There's a problem in White Pond. This technology has helped in the past. The funding appears to be modest, but I share your concern about the absence of clear town support. And I've been observing this for a while. It's not clear that because there are lots of things going on at White Pond, and Delia and others are involved in monitoring and other projects, it's not clear. They're not a co-applicant. Delia's not a co-applicant. There's no support from either Recreation Commission or from NRC. I don't know how the town manager views this. I know has been tension. So I don't know if there's overall town support for this project. The other part of it, is sort of the bidding process here. This is a private applicant, and we can't give a private applicant money directly. It has to be managed somehow. And also, my understanding is there would be a bidding process. There's a source here, the APOD scientist who has done very well for the White Pond community, but there would have to be sort of a sole source bidding process to get it to him. So there's a process issue, and then there's a town support issue. But looking beyond those, I think this is helpful to the pond, but it is clearly not the overall cure for prevention of the pond. So there's some ambiguities of, even though town council appeared to support this and say this was legally supported. I just have concerns about where this is in the town.
There have been many letters written in support of this from people in the town. And so there is that. I recall us asking whether there would be a letter from Delia, and my recollection is that they said it would be forthcoming, and I just have not seen it yet.
Well, just a clarification. I didn't mean, I meant the town manager of the town departments. There is clear support from the local community. A lot of those letters of support were from White Pond area residents. Yeah, clearly.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, I wonder if we actually have a process issue here, because my understanding was that town applications would need, all of these town applications should have a town signature on, and this one doesn't, as everybody's noted, that there doesn't, there's no clear support. So I'd ask Heather to please follow up on that to see if this is actually a valid application in that respect. And I do have concerns about this one, because I'm not sure that, I'm not convinced that all the potential options for treating the pond have been assessed, and I'm not convinced that it's just strange to me that this isn't an application in collaboration with people testing the water, and as I think whoever was speaking previously, I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, saying this is going to be an ongoing issue. This isn't, it's going to need, if everything that they say is going to happen will happen, it's going to need at least 2 years. But it seemed to me, in hearing more about it at the public forum, there's a lot of concerns about the high nitrates and the sewage, whether they're reassessing the sewage situation around there. I just think it's, it could be a real black hole for funding, and it concerns me a lot. But I would definitely like to follow up on whether the application is valid without a town signature.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. Paul?
Yeah, to follow up on that, if this had been an application from NRC as part of the solution, for the same money, I think it would have been appropriate, but it isn't the entire solution. And again, I don't want to be a broken record, but the support is curiously absent on this. And this was brought up when the applicant presented, and I was sure that she was going to come back with some letter of support from NRC or some co-application from Delia, and it didn't happen. So something is stuck within the support of the town departments on this.
Well, thank you. And I hope we can, Heather, will give them a nudge, because without that, it's hard for us to proceed. Thank you very much. So we still need follow up on that particular project. Okay, moving forward. And recognizing that everybody wants the White Pond to be swimmable.
I have another comment on that.
Oh, okay, Charles.
I agree with everything.
Just to finish my sentence for just 2 seconds.
Oh,
yeah, I'm sorry. No, but I mean, we all want White Pond to be swimmable. We all want this to be a resource our community can enjoy. The question is, how best to proceed and how to support that. Charles, I'm sorry.
Well, it's just that without having this, people probably won't be swimming at White Pond next summer. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm not sure that we know for certain, and maybe I'm just misinformed, Charles, but I didn't think we knew for certain that this would make it possible for people to swim there next summer. Absolutely.
You may be right.
I just don't know. I mean, I did not, the experiment is terrific. The ideas are wonderful, but how we figure out how to go forward, I think. The Concord Recreation Facilities Strategic Plan Consultant. Now, this is from Kate Hodges or Ann McCowan. I'm sorry if I'm not saying her name properly.
McEwen.
Thank you very much. May we hear some commentary on this project, please? It's a strategic plan for the Recreation Department. Okay, Paul?
Yeah, there've been some recent letters of support because I think Delia Anna is doing this plan on behalf of all the recreational assets. And I know that, the existing plan is old, and so assuming that they have to do some planning, including capital planning, some sort of strategic planning is needed. I do know the dollar amount on this was estimated. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It was estimated from similar plans done by other communities and by the previous plan that was done in 2014. So I think it's a reasonable estimate, probably not exact, but it's not totally out of whack. So I do think it's supported and needed, and I think she has a good plan going forward.
Thank you very much, Paul. Peter, and then John.
Just building on what Paul was saying, I think the last plan provided tremendous input and insight, and we've seen some very tangible results in terms of the recreational facilities in West Concord as well as Emerson. And I think there was a lot of insight gained and garnered from learning about best practices, on a national and also a regional basis as well. So I think the plan had both short and longer term impact, both of which I think were very valuable.
Thank you, Peter. John?
I wanted to ask Heather, we made some big grants to the Recreation Department in the past, and I assume that's supporting the work that we see going on at Emerson. Is there any of that money? Are they using all the money from our past grants?
I will have to look into that, but I believe they are.
Well, it's a very good question, John. I had the same question, actually, because we talked about softball fields and all sorts of things, and I've not seen those necessarily appearing. So it would be nice, Heather, if you could give us an update on how that money is being spent and what's been happening there. Would be really helpful.
Because if that money is all committed and in progress, and it certainly seems to be a lot of equipment, at least at Emerson, that would suggest that they're finishing up what they promised us they would do with our last grants. And now there's a new director, and it seems sensible, if this is what she thinks she wants to do next, to support her.
Absolutely. Thank you, John, so much. Do we hear other commentary? Tom.
And yeah, thanks. So as I recall, and maybe it was 2 funding cycles ago, we did not support their, I think it was a $500,000 request.
It was a
yeah, and
did we support none of it, Tom?
Heather may be able to help me there.
I just want to note the Emerson Field project was an application by the DPW, not the Recreation Department.
Ah,
okay,
so
it's
different applicants, different people that are overseeing those projects.
okay.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Heather. It just struck me that to kind of renew a kind of organized vision and framework for all of these town assets going forward, it seems very wise to me, given the big commitments the town has made to so many different assets and amenities. This seems like very good investment.
Thank you, Tom, so much. Do I hear any other opinions on that? This looks like one that we would probably want to fund then. And whether we can do all 75,000, we'll have to see as we go forward. But do we feel that this is one we would like to fund and should definitely be in the yes category? Do I hear anybody prepared not to support that? Okay. Staff and technical support, thank you all very much. Staff and technical support is one that we have routinely funded. Can I hear any discussion about that particular project, please? Hearing none, I will go forward and say this is one we have funded. Thank you, Bert. This is one we have funded all along, and I think we probably will again. Hearing no disagreement to that, I think that's in the yes column. Okay, a first rush through. Some of them absolutely, some of them need clarification. Thank you all for your careful and thoughtful deliberations. Let's now turn to the public for commentary on all of this and any questions that they might have. Yes. I'm sorry that it says A Mirth, and so I don't know the name, and if you could identify yourself and where you live, that would be terrific. Thank you.
All right. Let me know if you can see me now. My name is Assabet.
Yes, welcome.
I live at 449 Old Marlborough Road. I'm here about the Assabet Junction conversation, which you had a while ago. I have a couple of quick questions for you. The first, I sent a letter in earlier today. I don't know whether you've seen it or not, but it's probably in that stack of letters you have somewhere. I'd like you to put me down as not in support of anything other than keeping the property as it is.
Thank you.
With no additional construction if possible. The other thing I'd like to ask is, maybe you can address in your comments now, is what do you think the timeline is that the abutters need to bother about? I came to know about the deadline for letters, which was yesterday, and I live barely 400 feet from the property. So if somebody is under the impression that the neighbors know about this, they don't. So part of that is, how are you going to engage with the community? And the last one is maybe, or penultimate, you said there's ample opportunity at town meeting to voice our concerns. I'm new to Concord, but I've been around town politics long enough to know that if a committee such as yours shows up at a town meeting where I've been a moderator before with a recommendation, it'll be a huge uphill task for a community to turn it around. So what can you do to assure neighbors that you're going to have our input into whatever you propose? And the last thing I'll say is, there were members of your committee who mentioned the $2.8 million seems to be a fair price. There's a significant portion of that property which is marked as being for core habitat, which indicates it's not buildable. Of the 5-acre lot on 2B Upland, the assessor's card says it's $541,000. The 406 Old Marlborough Road is listed for $458,000, a total of $999,000, just under $1 million. So if it's $2.8 million, which is a fair market value, there seems to be a big gap between the two. So maybe you can talk about where the number, why it feels fair, given that half of it is not buildable. And I don't want to take up all the time of your meeting. Thanks for having us here. I'll drop my hand now and listen.
Great. I just want to say thank you very much. I mean, that's informative and that's helpful. And we really appreciate that kind of commentary. And we will have our own deliberations to exercise and to determine as to how we gather, really a broad voice on this question. And I really appreciate your coming very, very much.
Just one last thing. Peggy Briggs is not here. I forwarded my note to her as well for FinCom.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Sarah Murphy, and then Molly.
Yes, hi. Just very quickly, we have just moved in to 368 Old Marlborough Road. So our house is the first house down from the 406, okay, where the proposed entrance could possibly be. So just very quickly to reiterate what was just said, it's concerning to me that there seems to be a lot of talk about how the community has given input. And I learned about this meeting and all of this, what has taken place this afternoon at 4 o'clock. So we need to have a better sense of how the community is being informed and what we can possibly do to understand how our properties will be affected.
Sarah, that's an incredibly thoughtful comment. Information that came to us about the community being informed came from the people from the town who were doing the outreach and presenting the proposal. That's not our obligation, but I have to tell you, I welcome your commentary, and I hope we can find a way to support that dialogue and discourse. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Molly? Molly?
I'm sorry, it took me a moment to unmute. And I'll get my camera on. Hi, I'm Molly Carosi. I'm at 461 Old Marlborough Road, next to Amrit and his wife Kamala. And I also just found out about this within the last couple of days. So I think that I've missed the deadline for writing a letter to this. No, okay. But I just have a few quick comments. I would very much like the CPC to contribute to the Assabet River Bluff project, but for land acquisition only, not for any amount of housing, for several reasons. Number one would be safety. The access on either Upland or Old Marlborough. There are bus stops. My son gets on the bus to the high school at Stone Meadow Ridge, gets off the bus on the corner of Upland. There are a lot of traffic concerns as well. My second concern would be the previous points that were raised earlier by Burton about this being a keystone property between the rail trail and the rest of West Concord, and the importance of continuity in that land along the river. Another concern I have is in terms of housing. The number of houses that was mentioned tonight was 6, but yesterday at the meeting that I and several other people on this call attended, we heard it might be possibly as many as 12. I think even 6 is too many. Certainly 12 would be over the top. And my last concern, which I don't know that anyone has discussed yet, but this, aside from the existing 2-family house that is on Old Marlborough, this doesn't seem to have been, this land has been undeveloped for a long time. And I'm wondering if there is a precedent for building there. Are there relevant records that could be consulted? It seems like it has been open space for a long time. And so why would we want to disturb that? It's a wonderful open space, and I would very much like to see it be kept that way. And as Peter said, finally, this is an opportunity that doesn't come up very often, and I think that we should jump on it to preserve the land before a developer could buy it and put up any number of houses there with an access road on Upland. And
thank you, Molly, so much.
Diane,
John?
could I,
Yes.
if I could just clarify just one point, because the question of 6 versus 12 houses,
Right.
it's important so people don't get the wrong idea that there's not a specific project of building houses that's before the CPC. The 6 houses number was talked about what would a private landowner could build by right as a subdivision right now. So the prior comment about how much of the land would need to be protected because it's within the 100-foot setback, and it is our understanding from the Department of Land and Town and Planning, having engaged with the agent that is marketing the property and having looked at it, that you could fit 6 lots in a standard subdivision in there. Separately, there has been discussion of affordable housing units in different numbers, smaller and larger as well. So I just want to clarify that, but thank you.
Yes, thank you, Burton, very much. John? Richard?
Yes, John Richardson again from South Meadow Ridge.
Sorry, John, I did.
Just
I know
reiterating.
the first part of it.
Yeah,
So- Okay.
I think some of the prior speakers have covered most of the points that I'd make. One fact that came up in an exchange of emails that I was privy to is that apparently this section of the river has been given federal protection and federal recognition as an unbelievable resource. And I'm just wondering why somehow we're throwing housing and residential concerns into what should be a primary activity of the town of protecting this land. And so I don't know why the applicants can't just change the application to be an open space thing and go raise the money can't believe that with $1 million from your committee that they can't find the rest of the money somewhere in town to keep what is obviously almost a unique stretch of the river. And I think it's just overreach to try to muddy the waters, to create all these problems for the neighbors, for safety concerns and all of these things, when it's totally unnecessary. And we should solve the housing problems of the town on some other land. There has to be other land available.
Thank you, John, very much. Ursula.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi there.
Hello.
This is Ursula and Steve. We both live at 31 Riverside, so just opposite abutting the land of under concern. And we have several concerns. Again, I think the communication with the neighborhood is not yet flowing as we wish it will, or hopefully will be. Because, we just learned today as well that
I knew there was a meeting this afternoon at 4. Right.
Yeah, but I mean, the application has been filed in September, or I saw even a date of June. So obviously this process has been going on for a while. And obviously the community, I think as well, I forwarded the emails to various friends and neighbors who equally didn't know. So there is definitely a concern that I think the neighborhood should be more informed of what is going on.
We are very much in favor of a purchase of the land for it being protected as opposed to developed. And our property, as Esther said, overlooks on the opposite side of the Assabet River, the land, and we walk there frequently. It's a beautiful piece of land. And we're very supportive of it being acquired. However, I'm a little confused about the development too, because when we looked at a map of the land earlier today, most of it looked like it would be in the 200-foot buffer zone for wetlands. It looked like there was only a tiny section of the 5.5 acres which would be developable, even able to be developed.
Well, we will ask, thank you for your good question. We will ask Marcia at the public hearing to bring a map forward and demonstrate where housing might be developed if it were developed. And I think it behooves the citizens there in Concord and around to write to the planning department, to express your concerns, to speak up, because I think that's just an important part of this conversation. And obviously we are devoted to open space. That's one of the 4 categories that we support. We also are devoted to affordable housing. And whether this is the right spot for affordable housing or not is something that is going to require a lot of careful conversation on the part of the town and the residents that live around it and abut it. Thank you for your care and thank you for your engagement. It's very much appreciated. Let's see, Glenn and Juliana.
Oh, my thing is on.
Hi,
Glenn. Glenn Marmon, 416 Old Marlboro, completely surrounded by this land. Will be drastically impacted if anything on it changes. But that's actually not my point or my question. I spoke last time.
Right.
Actually, my question for the committee is just clarification on some dates. I think we've had a couple people mention before that they were confused about when letters needed to come in, where who we should even send letters to and by when about certain specific concerns. Like I honestly have a hard time understanding myself when a letter should go to you, what even should be the content, because the application that I have many concerns about the development, about any potential development, but also I know that's not exactly what you're approving on the application.
Right.
So if you give a little bit more clarity, that might help. It certainly would help me, hopefully it would help others about sort of.
Let me see if I can clarify that for you. And if I'm wrong, I know my colleagues will pop up and say, oh, no, not right. Letters are always welcome. So send in a letter, send it to Heather Gill at the planning department. And if you want to address it to Diane Proctor, you certainly may. We will receive that letter, with thoughtfulness. There is no limit in terms of those letters, or no absolute deadline, but Heather's going to tell me there is. Go, Heather.
So official letters of support, there is a deadline this Friday. But public comment letters can be submitted at any time.
So official letters would be the kind of letter that we were talking about, Glenn, when we were talking.
I'm sorry, Diane, I just muted you trying to mute myself.
You were
Sorry.
defining what an official letter was.
Right. Well, yes, an official letter, it would be one like Delia Kay, somebody from the town, or an organization that is helping to fund something. That's when such a letter would be official. But letters from the public are gratefully received. I would urge you to CC those letters to Marcia Rasmussen in the planning department, so that she too can be aware of what your community and what your neighborhood is thinking about. So that would be my own personal advice. So Paul and then Nancy Kerr.
Yeah, just a point of note for the public, there is a important public hearing on all applications on November 30th. That's
Right.
Another important date. So beyond the letters, there's a public hearing on all of these applications, including this one, coming up fairly soon.
And we will not be making any formal, final deliberation, Glenn, until the end of December. Hold on, let me just get a specific date for you. December 21st. So, well, yeah, I know. Or not, as the case may be. Nancy Kerr.
Hi, I live at 25 Upland Road across from the potential access road. And so am I to understand, first of all, I want to thank you, Diane. I think you've done a marvelous job of corralling all the comments and discussion. And I really am impressed with your ability to run a Zoom meeting. Secondly, so am I to understand that we're going to see a plan on November 30th at the public hearing? Is that the first time we're going to see a drawing that might tell us?
Well, you can go online and see that already, Nancy.
Well, no, I know what the land looks like. I'm talking about a design that might have housing on it. I mean, what? Yeah, I can't believe that we're talking about something that we are all picturing something totally different.
Right, I think that's right, Nancy. I think we'll ask Marcia if she can be at the public hearing.
Yeah, I would hope so.
And clarify that, because I think there's sufficient concern in the community that to not do that would be just irresponsible on our part. So
Diane, I think it would be premature to have any kind of design that was anything but speculative at this point.
Oh, exactly. That's fine. But we don't, I mean,
all along. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm not talking about engineering, architectural drawings. I'm just saying, like, what is the idea for this housing, the road, the whatever is coming?
Yeah, I think she can be quite general.
Yeah, well, that's easy.
So we will urge her to be as specific as she can be, given the planning and information she has, Nancy.
All righty, thank you.
Yeah, and because I know there's broad concern, and it's something we really need to be cognizant of and respect. So thank you very much. Okay, I don't see other public comment right now. Let's go on then to our committee. Paul, you weren't here, so I'm going to review just a minute the voting process. By majority of the committee, in fact, a determination can be made. But our preference has been over time, at least the 3 years I've been on the committee, our preference has been to try to create a consensus, to really listen carefully to each other, to hear each other's points of view. And we've had some complicated ones, where I actually was asleep, I tossed and turned and had dreams about one of them, having to do with the, well, don't laugh at me, Bert. Given the passion that some people felt and the concerns that I maybe had. So, we really do listen carefully to each other and try to come to some sort of respectful consideration and deliberation. In the end, we do vote. And there could be a dissenting vote and there could be a couple, but in the end, it's the majority that prevails. But we won't do that until we feel we've had sufficient conversation and deliberation, which gets me to the next point for just a minute. We have in December, the 7th and the 21st on our calendar. Given the number of concerns that have been expressed tonight about various projects, should we pencil in right now the 14th of December?
So just to note that the warrant doesn't close until February. So we do have two dates in January that we could also use to deliberate.
Thank you very much. I thought it closed in January. So that's, I guess I must have known that in another lifetime. So shall we pencil in 2 dates in January, Heather? And if we don't need them, then we don't need them?
Yeah, so there's 2 dates on the website already with your schedule. Let me just pull it up and I can. January 4th and January 18th.
Okay. So if everybody,
Diane, on the voting process, I just, we discussed earlier, I brought up this issue of conditional approval, only because, you know, some of these have uncertainty that perhaps won't get resolved completely by the time we vote. So I'm just wondering if we can get some clarity, Heather, on, or maybe at this meeting, on whether we can approve by consensus with certain conditions or certain unknowns becoming knowns before before town meeting or something like that.
I think that's kind of all dependent on what you would want to condition them. It's kind of a broad question and hard to answer without knowing specific. I don't believe that you guys can condition that you want to approve a specific set of plans for the development of that lot. I don't think that the CPC is in the business of designing a site plan. So I think that would be something that would not be appropriate. So I really think it would be dependent on what the conditional approval would be. Does that make sense?
yeah, and this is something we're going to have to keep exploring, Paul, because
Yeah,
I think we're in kind of new territory on this one. And
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think we're just going to have to be careful about how we go forward. And incidentally, the warrant closing had to do with the special town meeting. So that's how I got my dates a little bit confused. Tom, you were going to say.
Well, no, I guess I'm agreeing with exactly what Heather said. I think we put together the clarity of application with whatever other conditions that we need to make our recommendation. And the applicant agrees to that, and we move forward on that basis. If they disagree or they veer off track, then, you know, we've got to revisit the whole thing. But I think, you know, that's the crafting of each one of these recommendations. You know, that's essentially, I think, what you're talking about. We do it in a way that we feel comfortable and confident, and that the applicant also feels aligned with where we're headed, and we move forward on that basis. And if things change, then we've got to revisit everything.
Right. And I think Burton's fencing issue is one where discourse and dialogue may come to a common consensus or a common understanding. And so, I mean, I think that all of these things take careful and thoughtful deliberation.
Diane, if I can make 2 quick points. So Paul, one thing that often comes up in our deliberations is, can you make changes? Once we vote on an article, which is essentially an article that says we recommend the following things, and it's a list of funded items, they get voted all in one go. We can make changes to the degree we are removing funding. We can't add in funding. So let's say we said we want to fund the fences for $250,000, and the state came through and funded it. And that happened in February. We could amend the article to remove that funding, but we can't add it back in. Another thing, just with regards to the some of the conditional ideas around, let's say, for example, around the Assabet River Bluff project. I mean, they want to keep in perspective that what we're funding is the acquisition of the land, and if to the degree it was owned by the town and there was any further development of the land, there would be, I would say, ample public process involved there in terms of deciding how to dispose of the land and through the affordable housing committees, through the funding mechanism to build the houses through final disposition of the land. This is step one.
Yeah, and over which we will have modest to no influence. Yeah, Peter, except as citizens of Concord. Peter.
I would also add that we are going to go through a process of developing the conditions that will go into the memorandum of understanding and the grant agreements as well. So while we will be making a series of recommendations, ultimately, we still have to go through the process of determining, what these conditions are going to be.
Okay, well, I think that you're using the C word there, and so I understand that as part of the grant approval, there's that element.
And dialogue, Paul. I mean, one of the examples was the kind of product people were going to be using for roofing on one of the projects that we supported in the past. And after lots of deliberations, we helped them come to an understanding that perhaps a different kind of roofing would be more effective. So that kind of discussion took place, and that was thanks to the expertise of Nancy Nelson, who understood something about that historical building there. So, there's a lot of discussion, and that's one of the wonderful things about the experts we have on this committee. We have architects, we have lawyers, we have people who are who are scientists, we have experts in housing and the housing needs in this community. So, I mean, and we have a judge. I mean, does it get any better? Okay. May I please, the funding and distribution letters and fund distribution status, there is no update on that. Project update report, there is nothing right now. Approval of minutes. Can we, the October, yeah, thank you, Nancy. The first is the October 5th minutes. May I hear anything about those minutes, or somebody vote to, Nancy, you want to vote for that one? You want to say that you want to accept the minutes? Can somebody please move to accept them?
Just to say that I submitted a comment to Heather.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Was it a major one that will require us to hold our vote?
No, it was just my title.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sarah.
I move to accept the minutes of October 5th.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Do I hear a second?
Second.
You hear a second.
Thank you. All in favor of accepting the minutes as amended?
Aye.
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 Oh, do I have to call roll for this one?
I think so.
Okay, Peter?
Aye.
Thank you. Burton?
Yes.
Tom?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
With an appropriate title. Charles?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
And Paul?
Yes.
And yes, I too, so that is unanimous. And then the minutes for October, where's my little piece of paper here? Minutes for October 19th. I have one small correction that I didn't send you, and I'm sorry I didn't. It's because it's so tiny. But on the third page, second major paragraph down, $40,000 has been enough to, the O is missing, to cover all of the expenses. Do you see that, Heather? Just one little zero there, or O, I mean. Your minutes are superb. Are there any other corrections to or concerns about the October 19th minutes? May I hear a motion? Oh, Peter.
I was just going to make a motion.
Oh, thank you. Would you make one, please?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the October 19th minutes as amended.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Second, thank you. Peter, yes?
Yes.
Okay, Burton?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Sarah?
Aye.
Charles?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Paul? And
Yes.
I think we've lost Nancy, so and I also, and so thank you very much. Signage status. Heather, do you have anything to add about signage status?
I don't have an update today.
Okay, thank you. Before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you. I think that we've noticed tonight that there's a lot of community interest in what we're doing right now. I think I've not seen that before in such vigorous amounts, and how we balance that and how we express that and how we deal with that, I think is going to be something we're going to have to kind of feel our way along and figure out how we do that well. But thank you for your patience, because I think it was really important for us to hear what people were feeling. Do you all agree with that?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I would say this is one advantage of these Zoom meetings, is that in certain respects, they're more accessible. And I would second what the earlier person said. Diane, you're doing a spectacular job. And the raised hand functions amongst the board members, I think, has been part of that, but I think it's been quite productive.
Thank you, Burton. That's not how I felt. My anxiety.
Can I ask a question, historical question? How often have projects been so controversial that they've been controversial up to the point of town meeting? Is that pretty unusual?
In my 3 years, they haven't been. I mean, that's what made this really such an interesting evening. We have the White Pond, we have which all you have to do is say White Pond to some people in this town, and the amount of money that the town has spent on White Pond, costs, and you will get a very strong response from people. And then we've got the we've got the Assabet River. We also have I think the whole question about fencing along the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. So I mean, there are a variety of discussions here that are going to require, and then we have the Right Tavern. Something we all want to have, that Right Tavern be a vigorous and important part of our town, but whether the project as is presently presented and clarification on it is going to require some careful work on our part. John, and then Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to say, in response to Paul, there is another step that everyone will remember, which is the FinCom, because they take a look at everything we're doing. And the one controversy I remember a couple of years ago, and they pointed it out, and there were disagreements there, was the funding of the two religious organizations, which fortunately, after their discussion, proceeded to town meeting approval.
Right. But but it didn't produce the outpouring of community response. FinCom did raise some, and that was the toughest one, I think, John, because it for those of you who don't have the background, it preceded or it followed a series of lawsuits challenging other CPC towns for having funded something that was church oriented. So it was a somewhat dicey moment.
So what, Diane, just to follow up, and I don't mean to prolong this, what is our role in sort of I'll call it managing the process? Because obviously there's at least one application that's quite controversial that has a lot of support, but it has a lot of issues. We want to have a soft landing of these projects going forward, but there's a lot of steps between now and then with community involvement and others. And I'm not sure it's our role to manage that whole process, but it seems that we have to help.
Well, you're right. It isn't our role to manage the whole process, Paul, but it is our role to balance what we're hearing and communicate that to the people that are eventually managing the project. So, Sarah.
So I was wondering, Diane, the next meeting is the public hearing.
That's right.
And I guess normally you would just go through the list as we did today in the order that they're on our sheet, but I wonder if we have to think about that a bit more carefully, given the public interest in some of these is higher than others. So I just wondered, would we assign a certain time period for each of them, or put the most controversial first or last? Or I just wondered if anybody had any guidance on that.
Okay, I had a thought, but let's hear what Heather has to say. Thank you, Heather.
For the public hearings, I put together a PowerPoint presentation that the chair gives. that summarizes each application, and it's by category. So it would go kind of in the order that we went tonight: community housing, historic preservation, open space, recreation. All the projects are presented in clusters by category.
But when do we
And then-
invite public comment? Is that at the very end or after each one?
At the very end of the presentation, so not
okay.
after each project.
Okay.
Because I was thinking maybe it might be advantageous to do it after each project, but if the PowerPoint would preclude that as an approach. So
Are the applicants present to answer questions or explain? It sounds like we put Marcia on the spot a bit tonight of explaining a few things.
Yeah, so I send out an email to the applicants reminding them of the public hearing, encouraging them to attend in case there are questions that are asked that the committee cannot answer.
Okay.
So that would be expected, I think, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other comments? You guys are so good. Okay, thank you all. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved, okay. Sarah?
Oh,
Aye.
Aye. John?
Yes.
Yes. Peter?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Burton?
Yes.
Paul?
yes.
A moment of thought. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Great job, Diane.
Bye.
Great job, Heather.
Well done.
A quick
Well
shout
done.
out to Linda Escobedo for attending from the select board. Thank you, Linda, wherever you are.